Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Valiantis webinar for Effective Atlassian Governance. We have a special webinar today with some guest speakers from Tempo. I'm Bonnie Byer. I'm a delivery manager and consultant from Valiantis with 20 some odd years of experience in engineering and the Atlassian ecosphere. And our guests, we have Robin. Robin, would you introduce yourself?
Certainly. Hi, I'm Robin Morrison. I'm the head of product operations at Tempo, and I have experience helping operationalize the vision. I've worked in both product organizations, professional services, and e-commerce, and I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks. Brandon?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Brandon Grady. I'm a VP of Engineering at Tempo Software. I'm really excited to be here today. My history, my career dates back nearly 30 years at this point, where I've been in engineering positions pretty much that whole time. But definitely excited about the current work that we're doing with the fine folks at Valiantis, and happy to be here today to chat about it.
Yep.
And Jason.
All right, Jason Butner. I'm the head of Enterprise Agility and IT Consulting here at Valiantis, and happy to be here as well. So let's jump into just a little bit about folks who are out there who might not know who Valiantis is. Just do a quick introduction on it. We're a Platinum Solution Partner. We're focused. We're all in on Atlassian, and so you could see all the badges there. I was joking with somebody the other day. It's like A Few Good Men, can you handle the truth, and, Jack Nicholson with his full regala there. But anyway, that's what that looks like. But take a look at that, and you can see that we are all in on Atlassian. Next slide. I just want to point out one thing. That's our commitment to value. One thing that attracted me to come work with Valiantis was that, and I was a customer, just full disclosure, at one point in time. And we did projects together, and I always saw, and the folks I worked with would say, we're committed to providing value at every interaction. And I always felt that. Whatever we paid to Valiantis as a customer, I felt like I got twice the value out of what I was paying for. And that just, kept me in there. If I had a problem that needed to be solved, they just solved it. And so now it's awesome working with Valiantis and for Valiantis, and that is kind of the big thing for me. That's like the true north. And so I'm hoping that comes out in the discussion we have here today as well, because we're fortunate enough to be on a governance webinar with customer, and I almost hesitate to say customer because really it's a partnership as well, the way it feels and the way it's played out. So thank you guys all for joining.
Well, our previous webinar series on governance, part of our values, of course, is make every interaction remarkable. And so we provide a lot of webinars and videos on our YouTube channel to provide free value to all of you. And our governance webinar typically provides an introductory training of what governance is, why organizations should care about it, and how you can implement it using your Atlassian tools. But since today we have special guests from Tempo, yay, we're actually going to spend more time on what they've been doing and learning through their transformation. However, I did want to point out that if you want some of that educational content, you can go watch some of the previous webinars on the Valiantis YouTube channel. And as I mentioned there, I still think our March one was the best one we did. The last one, we actually had a lot of technical difficulties, but that March one went off without a hitch. So Brianna, can you put that link in the chat for me? I also wanted to mention, as we're going through the webinar, feel free to put your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try to get to those when we get to the Q&A section. Our agenda today is we are going to talk about the Tempo and Valiantis engagement, how we've been working together for their Tempo Ways of Working initiative. But before we get into that, I'm going to give you a brief overview of what is governance, why do we care about it, and how do you implement it? And then we'll get right into the guts of our drink your own champagne case study, or some people like to call it eat your own dog food, depending on how you look at it. So what is governance? Well, Governance is a word that needs a qualifier. It really depends on what is being governed. If we're talking about an organizational transformation, then it's the full-legged stool, the full three-legged stool: process, tools, and people. When we talk with our clients, we're typically talking about process governance or the Atlassian tools governance. But whatever the governance is, there are certain characteristics of good governance. It needs to be representative. It needs to be holistic in its implementation, applying lots of systems thinking. You want to optimize for the whole system, not for each individual part. It allows the culture to drive the processes, and then allow the processes to drive the tools. You want it in that importance, rather than the tools driving some crazy process and really impacting negatively the culture. And you also want to include proper change management practices like CAR. And when we think about transformations, especially when spoken in the business world, it's sometimes considered a four-letter word, and that's for good reason. The literature varies and the reasons are numerous, but a majority of transformations fail. So the impact is, skepticism. They have to ultimately be the ones who have to live through it, and they're the ones that have to clean up the mess afterwards. Does that mean we shouldn't try a transformation? No. But it does mean that we need that value proposition. Why are we doing this? And what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve? Those need to be well understood. Often the value proposition isn't truly defined until you actually hit a tipping point. And I've seen organizations reach that tipping point from a lot of different paths. Often Jira was brought in to the company by engineering. And a large company, IT historically has good governance, but engineering, not so much. They're much more focused on their deliverables for their customers, right? The tool is just a tool to get the job done. And so they don't typically have good governance over that Jira system. And then when they eventually throw that Jira over the wall to IT and say, hey, you go manage this for us, that's a tipping point right there. IT has to establish that governance. Or a cloud migration or a consolidation of several different engineering Jira systems, that's going to also lead to a tipping point. Another common tipping point is brought on by a series of acquisitions or mergers. When multiple previously independent companies are brought together and then mixed up together, the cultures and the processes and the tools that they're using are all very diverse, and they have varying levels of compatibility. So this leads to the employees and the leadership being frustrated in their daily work and in their decision making. When those frustrations lead to horrible things like employee attrition or schedule delays, or worse yet, customer dissatisfaction, that tipping point hits the proverbial fan. A wise company will reach out for help before it gets to that point, so that they can lean on the expertise and lessons from consulting companies like us. And one company did just that. Your favorite neighborhood Atlassian app company, Tempo. They've been really successful, and so they've gone through several acquisitions and mergers with ALM Works, RoadMonk, AlphaServe, Old Street Solutions, and Liquid Planner. And all of these are leading to Tempo being really well placed to provide the full project and portfolio management solution. And so to fully deploy that holistic solution set, their leadership knew that they needed to unify their organization into a single operating model. And that became the rally cry, the Tempo ways of working. And so what we've worked on together, Valiantis helping them, is to establish that governance over their processes and over their Atlassian tools. As I mentioned before, they have certain characteristics, and they also follow similar activities. You need to identify the representative team. Who are the employees and leaders that are going to be that governance board? And then you want to perform the activities to make the decisions about what is being governed. Then you need to document those decisions and build the training and enablement models, and then implement the solution in phases, iteratively, with the support model and with proper change management. So for identifying our processes, our ways of working, so to speak, we can perform a process mapping workshop. And this is a collaborative hands-on activity to guide the process governance board and any subject matter experts that they want to pull in, while they actually identify what is the best solution for their organization, because every organization is going to be different. So what is right for us? And we did this with Tempo on site in Montreal earlier this year. I felt it was really successful, with everyone really engaged. It was a great group. And they came up with a really well thought out solution defined. Also with enablement and change management, those are critically important with process transformation. So we did a lot of agile classes in advance with the governance board, both during that on-site workshop, and then we also had some safe classes to give them a perspective on what's available for out-of-the-box type process guidance. We also had them build out playbooks. The governance board themselves, then after they identify what their process would be, built out these playbooks for enablement for all of the engineering teams on how the process activities from intake and prioritization to planning and execution and release, how all of those should be executed going forward. And then Brandon, our Tempo Wow champion extraordinaire, he actually prepared Tempo internal podcasts, and that really helped a lot of the change management as well. It would explain on what the decisions were that were being made, how they were made, and what that meant for everyone. Also, several FAQs and other resources have been built over time, and we continue to update those frequently as we get new questions. So change management and enablement has to be it's a very important activity when it comes to a process transformation. And then when it comes to the tools, see if my slides advance, we have a similar model. We need that representative team, and we need to make sure that we have all of our decisions documented, and enablement's important, and change management and support. When it comes to identifying what we're trying to accomplish, one of our first steps is we need to identify what is our JIRA architecture. What are our configurations going to be for the system? And I go into a lot of those kinds of discussions in some of those other webinars, so I won't dwell on those, but one of the most important aspects is, what does our data topology need to look like for our system? How are we organizing our data and our JIRA projects in the system so that we know where to look for the information that we want? And then we can automate things, and we can create all those great reports and use those project management tools effectively. A lot of companies also have unique requirements for compliance, certification requirements, or they have specific reporting requirements, or they have certain tooling preferences, such as Tempo. They really want to be Tempo on Tempo. They want to use their tools to do this, their project management. So that will inform a lot of those architectural decisions. And to help them with that, we needed to make sure that we had good enablement for that JIRA governance team. So we have lots of options, like with JIRA boot camps or JIRA service management boot camps or Confluence. In many cases, that enablement extends to the end users with Atlassian user academies, or we even have custom video training where we can actually create custom training videos, snippets, or things like that for companies. So when you're establishing governance, it's not just about the actual, we're in charge and we're going to make sure that everybody follows these standards. It's about enabling everybody to use that solution, provide a proper support model, and a change management model as well. And so I think that's my overview, really, of what good governance looks like for process and tools. And I think we're ready to get right into the interview of what we've been working with Tempo. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and hand it over to Jason.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. And I don't know, Brandon or Robin, if you just have some tail on thoughts to what Bonnie just shared before we get into the interview, anything you'd add to that, or we could just
Well, I
jump
don't know.
in.
She described it so well. I feel like you don't even need to interview us anymore. I think we're good.
We're done.
Okay, webinar over. Wow.
Webinar's done.
No, so I'll just start with you, Brandon. Before we just get into all the meat of all the benefit that, has taken place over the last several months, like, would you kind of like to characterize how we got together? We're a kind of a implementation partner of Atlassian's, like we said, all in on Atlassian, but we work with you guys to implement your solutions, and you're a application platform partner in the marketplace. And so would you like to kind of talk about how we got together in this way?
Yeah, and I think it's from a lot of different directions that you kind of touched on, right? I mean, we obviously had all of the things that Bonnie mentioned that contributed to tipping points to getting to a point where we really needed to start looking at making a system out of our ways of work and putting governance in place and the like. That started to build, while at the same time, like you mentioned, we're very prevalent in the Atlassian ecosystem. So we're very, very aware of Aliantis, and we partner with you on a lot of other work. And it was sort of like a match made in heaven, right? Like, let's work with our partner. Let's work on something that, frankly, we hadn't done before at Tempo, even though we were hoping that our tools could do this for other companies. So it made a lot of sense. There was a lot of synergy, pardon the phrase, in a lot of the events leading up to that really said, boy, we should really look to Valiantis to really help us with this. We've got a need, we've got tools, and we've got the energy for it. And this can not only do well for us as a company, but it can also help to really cement our usage of our own tools so that we truly understand how our customers can use our tools. We can become kind of our own first biggest customer. So yeah, it was I don't want to say it was a slam dunk decision, but it kind of was, right? It's like, let's go work with Valiantis. They can absolutely help us here.
Yeah, awesome. And so on that note, what was the tipping point for you guys? What was the compelling reason to say, let's do this? I mean, it's a great story. I mean, as I hear you talk about it, I'm like, oh, that's great. But there had to be a tipping point. What was that for you guys?
Yeah, and I've been trying to figure that out in my head. If I'm being honest, I think the tipping point probably was before I even joined Tempo, when we first acquired ALM Works and RoadMonk. So ALM Works and RoadMonk were two largish, similar sized companies to Tempo at the time. So already complexity was being introduced to the system, right? It was three different companies with three different ways of working, three different cultures, three different sets of tools. Most of those tools were doing the same thing, even the same tools. I think at one point, and I don't want to steal thunder from anybody, but I think at one point we have had 12 different Atlassian cloud accounts. I think we're down to 10 now. We're working on it, but it's just an enormous amount of complexity that gets added in when you acquire companies. And I think Bonnie hit on that really well. In fact, I think at least two of the several points that Bonnie made can be traced back to exact things that happened with us when we started to acquire and merge companies into the overall Tempo umbrella. So back then, I'd say it's probably 2-3 years ago when the tipping point was, although we probably didn't recognize it until last fall. And last fall, we had acquired our fifth company. So if you're keeping track, that would be 6 companies. 3 years ago were independent and operating on their own. Now operating under one large Tempo umbrella. And it really became like very obvious that we couldn't really sustain separate processes, separate systems, separate ways of doing things for much longer, especially if we wanted to lean into our strategic portfolio management strategy, right? I think Bonnie mentioned it. One of the big benefits to having all of these companies under one Tempo umbrella is that they can work in a combined fashion at different parts of the portfolio management strategy, from execution to the boardroom to everywhere in between. But if you're working on separate processes all over the place, it's pretty hard to have a combined roadmap and a combined delivery mechanism that you can rely on and can be predictable, which our customers need, which we need to successfully execute on that strategy. And the other thing that I'll write down, and Bonnie mentioned this one and reminded me, last year, just to make sure everything was as complex as possible, we also engaged in chasing down our first set of compliances. So we actually got ISO 27001, 27701, and SOC 2 compliant last year, along with a couple of other, miscellaneous compliances. And it's challenging to do that in an environment where you have to have 6 different responses to a lot of the questions that the auditors are looking for. Not to mention the fact that you're not doing yourself any favors by having to try to secure those different lanes of execution and processes. So a lot of things came together, I think, late last year that it made it very obvious. I think the tipping point probably 3 years ago, but when we finally recognized it, it was punching us in the face, was last fall.
Pretty visceral. So, and that may really go right into the next question, which mentioned from execution up to the boardroom, got to get buy-in for something like this. It's one thing to have a thought like, hey, this would be really valuable. We're getting punched in the face. I think this could help. But how did you go about getting buy-in from across the company to say, yeah, we want to commit our time, energy, and resources into this project?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And again, it's hard to put my thumb on it exactly. These things kind of evolve over time. But when I joined the company just a little bit over a year ago, I took on a team that we call it Central Technology. And our whole mission, our whole vision was to centralize anything that we could. So I started executing in that fashion right away, along with my team. And we were starting to, in subtle ways, pave the way for this. One of the things we did was centralize the quality organization, not such that it was a dependency for other organizations to do testing, but in a way where we could influence different parts of the organization towards a consistent quality approach. We did the same thing with security. So that started the ball rolling. By the fall, we had hired our new CTO, Adam Wallace, and our new head of product, Joe Watson. And the two of them came in under the assumption that, hey, we've got 6 different ways of doing things. I think we are not being as efficient as we could be. And hey, we've got this strategic portfolio management strategy that we're trying to execute on. How are we going to make this happen? Now, the two of them have done fantastic work in the past on different transformations and evolutions. This is probably, I'm not going to put words in their mouth, this is by far the most complex consolidation of efforts that I've ever been a part of. I've been a part of different acquisitions and mergers in the past, but you're usually talking about 2 companies merging together. 6 companies merging together, I think, presented a challenge, an interesting challenge for all of us. But I think the thing that ultimately led us to really getting the buy-in was our CEO. Our CEO kind of took a step back one day and said, it's kind of crazy that we don't even use all of our own products in all of our different groups. Each individual pocket, acquired company was using their own product, absolutely. Like the timesheets team was using timesheets, the road mapping team was using roadmaps, the ALM Works team was using structure, but not a single one of them was really using the entire suite as one. And our CEO took a step back and said, this is crazy. Like, isn't there such a thing called dog fooding or drinking your champagne or something like that? I'm putting words in his mouth. And we said, yeah, there absolutely is. And we need to, I think Adam and Joe were really the ones to really lean into Mark, our CEO, and say, it can't just be a tools thing though, Mark, right? It's yes, tools are a big aspect of it, but we need to address this holistically. We need to address this from a process perspective, from a culture perspective, from the ground up, sort of, but really across the board. It can't just be, hey, let's pour effort into utilizing our tools. So it really started as and we've shared the term before, tempo on tempo initiative. And it quickly ballooned and evolved into more of a holistic approach towards what I guess we would call a transformation across the organization.
Yeah. Wow. And so, we kind of hit that point where I remember in the discussions, it was like, okay, we're really going to do this. This isn't just a really neat idea anymore. And it is a neat idea. And the branding, we've called you the branding guy, branding Brandon, tempo on tempo. and then it kind of morphed into Tempo Wow because you wanted to develop a Tempo way of working. And it was, there's all the branding momentum, but then it was kind of like, okay, let's get started. Where do we start, really? And Robin, that's where we met you and got introduced to you. And I remember us even jamming on like, oh, we're going to do value stream management, but like a certain version of it. And I think you got a hold of it and you're like, it's not even just that. Like, so what were the next steps that you remember?
Yeah, happy to share. So first of all, I do want to say that our CEO sponsoring this was so important because it lended weight to how important this was. And then our next step was Brandon and I formed a core team, and we looked for people throughout the organization who had system-wide views. So Bonnie, you talked about the systems thinking. We wanted people who are representative of specific functions and represented these acquisitions, and we're going to look beyond and really look at the whole company and understand what was possible for us to build. And so we started this core team. We had members, as I mentioned, from these different functional areas. It included people outside of product and engineering. We were product and engineering heavy, but we included marketing and sales, for example, as well, since we knew that our ways of working will impact the entire organization. And then I also want to mention how important Adam and Joe have been to have executive sponsors who are really involved. We've had weekly meetings with them twice a week to make sure that we have visibility and support. And if we need any help, they're right there with us. And then we created a charter, and the charter formation included all of the core team members and our executive sponsors looking at the mission that Mark set. And then we identified what are our boundaries, what are our limitations, like what can we not change essentially in the organization. We agreed upon our current business problems and the business needs and what our target condition was. So we understood our goals. Because we're a really customer-oriented company, we also wanted to document what do we think the benefits are going to be to our customers if we do that. So we all aligned on that. And we identified our guiding principles for how we're going to make decisions about the tools that we will implement as part of our Tempo ways of working. And then Valiantis joined, and it was incredibly valuable because, first of all, Valiantis brings both the people, process, and tooling expertise, and also the kind of the outside point of view to kind of question what our thinking was. And they were able to interview people beyond just the core team so that more voices were heard, and that was input into our design. So that was also really, really important. Then, as you mentioned, we at first were like, is this value stream mapping or what is it? And it seems so obvious, like standing in the back. But at the time, we thought, well, what are our processes? Because, on a day-to-day basis, you're just doing them, all the processes all at once. And so it actually took a lot of deep thinking and drawing. And then we figured out, okay, it's prioritization and intake. It's execution, it's planning, then it's execution, and then again, because we're a product organization, it's release management. So we identified these 4 major phases, and then we decided we needed a workshop where everybody would align on designing those phases. And so we had our core team, our executive sponsors, and we invited additional key stakeholders from the organization to come and participate in that design session. But before we got there, in addition to identifying those 4 main phases, we needed to identify a common language because we've already talked about 6 different companies. We all had different versions of some of the words that you might think are the most basic and shared, like story. So we came together and we literally had hours of meetings looking at our lexicon, is what we called it, agreeing on our core lexicon, and then we were able to run this workshop and the design session. And we might have more questions about that, but it was a fabulous workshop. It was a week long. Everybody was incredibly engaged. we deep dived and came up with really, really good detailed designs of each one of these phases. And then we prioritized the planning phase and the prioritization phase, and then the planning phase, which is what we just did. We just did our first PI planning, is what we called it.
I got to insert here. How did Emma play into that workshop? Tell me.
Yes, that was so fun. So we had a lot of people in this workshop, and Bonnie made that little Elmo. So enough. Let's move on if people haven't seen that acronym before. And it made it really fun because some people really want to share their ideas. And even if they're sharing them, they maybe made their point in the first 2 sentences, but they might want to share more. So after we would have lots of discussions and people understood the point, we had a lot of fun with Elmo. Thank you, Bonnie.
Yeah, it may or may not have been used on me since the offset as well.
Elmo is alive and well still.
And now he lives on in Slack.
He lives on. I love it. Bonnie went to Hobby Lobby before flying up to Montreal and made those for you guys. So that was a labor of love.
It was.
Yeah, and to get through that much content, I mean, what you just described is like, wow, that's amazing. And to get through that in a week, or even like what you guys have been able to accomplish just in the last few months, has been incredible, honestly. So kind of moving on in the questions, kind of want to learn more about, how you approach change management, and maybe a couple other kind of like follow-on questions is, big challenges you faced and how are teams adopting right now?
Yeah, I can share first a little bit about our change management approach. I want to restate again, even though we've said this, it's been really valuable to have our executives so behind this. So at every single all hands meeting, we have time on the all hands where not only has Brandon shared his wow casts, as he calls them, but he also talks about all the key decisions, what our current phase is, what we're starting. So that is really, really helpful. But one of the things I learned in this process, and I think it's especially more apparent because of the multiple ways of working, is that even though we're very transparent with this, it doesn't really hit anybody until they have to change the way they're working. And so some of the additional things we've done, as Bonnie mentioned, we created an FAQ document to help managers be able to speak to questions that they would be getting. We had more targeted sessions with managers. We've had targeted sessions with our product managers because they're leaders in the organization and a lot of people come to them as well. We've had targeted training sessions on specific items like, for example, we changed the way we're documenting the features that we want to build. And so we had training sessions on how do you build that? How do you size that? And things like that. And then we would also have office hours so that people could come with more general questions as well. And then frankly, the great thing about having a cross-functional core team with people who are so invested in it is that they spent a lot of time answering questions, speaking to people, being extremely responsive. So having a very active, committed core team is also essential, I believe, to the change management as well.
Yeah, if I were to say one thing, that's probably the most important thing that we did, the most successful, even though I think we had a little bit of fits and starts when we first created the team. We had some blind spots that we missed. We forgot to include product management, for example. We eventually remedied that, but having those group of champions really set up future successes and put other folks on the spot versus just Brandon or Robin saying, this is how this is, and just deal with it. It could be people that they might have more direct line of sight, more history with, certainly more in their line of organizational structure. And coming from them, it just carried a lot more weight.
Yeah, that makes it fully representative, and that's so powerful.
Yep. Okay. What do you think was the biggest challenge or the biggest surprise, like good thing that came from this?
Well, I'll tell you what I think our biggest challenge is just the distributed nature of our company. Tempo is fully remote. We exist in, I don't know how many time zones. I wish I had the statistic, but it's at least a dozen time zones across the planet. And that just made there's no like pre-made blueprint for how to do scaled planning and scaled processes in a system like in an organization kind of like that. So we were taking guidance from a lot of the luminaries who'd come before us and the material that Valiantas shared with us at expert levels, but it was really kind of creating our own path through it, which I think is necessary anyway. But that just, I think, added a bit of complexity to pretty much everything we've done. Is just how diverse, how separated we are on the planet.
I would concur.
About you,
So
Robin?
yeah, yeah, I think everybody feels if they're designing a complex planning session where you're trying to do it concurrently. In my experience in the past, you've forced everybody to be on a specific time. So people are either working really late or really early so that you're planning at the exact same time. But we didn't want to do that because of some of the cultural, I guess, just the way people work in some of the other countries where we have significant operations. So we designed a longer period of planning with shorter time periods per day to allow for asynchronous and then some synchronous sessions. But we had to design different kinds of status intake, like how are you doing on these key areas each day, and intake dependencies and risks so that we could manage it more in a as asynchronously as possible to allow people to really work within their time zone instead of staying up late for themselves. So that was a bigger challenge than I expected going into it.
Yeah. Well, that's a big deal because it's not like Tempo said, okay, we'll just stop working for the next few months and focus on this project. Yeah.
Right.
Wow. Yep. And that's so similar to so many folks tuning in on this particular webinar. Those who are going to watch the recording after is, we're in a global world, which sounds a little redundant now, but you feel it when you do a project like this. Wow. So now you have, I guess I don't want to give away the, you've kicked some things off. It's not just let's plan, let's do process mapping. You've done some things now. How are people liking it?
Is so far so good. Like we mentioned earlier, last week was our first PI plan. And frankly, one of the things we thought about was what did we think was going to be hard and went easier. It's almost a little eerie how accepted it was. Like we were expecting a little bit more energy, potentially negative energy coming from it because, hey, you're moving my cheese. I've always planned this way. Why are you asking me to plan this way? But largely it was well accepted. We came in, at full speed and are still trying to come up with some ideas on how to formalize the plan. For example, how to make sure that the commitments that we have individually collected can be aggregated and made to be a more global system-wide commitment. But overall, I think it had gone very well up to this point. Now, the next 12 weeks will tell the story a little better. We'll see how if execution. We anticipate that execution is going to be a bit more efficient, at least from the perspective of understanding what's going on in different parts of the organization, where in the past you had to go to, potentially upwards of 15 different places to understand what was going on in the various teams around the company. Now we actually have the ability and the promise of being able to collect it in one single way, in one single view, using Tempo tools, by the way. So yeah, I mean, we're really excited. Hope is definitely there right now, and we're seeing good signs early on. But again, I think we're on day 2 of execution right now.
I you know, in the engineering world, we look at form and function, and so the function, it sounds like it's solid. There's thought that went into all this, but from a form standpoint, I heard a report from Bonnie that it was almost, she was like, "Oh my gosh, this thing's almost like a party." And I think like 150 people show up, and she said, "It's like a party here." So I don't know what you guys did. I don't know if there were drinks or confetti or what was going on when you guys kicked off, but it sounded fun. Um, all right. So maybe a couple more questions. I don't know how we're doing on time, Bonnie, if we need to move along, but this is going really well. I really think this is valuable. We talked about what was difficult, the synchronicity of time and global operations and managing all this. Was there a surprise like, whoa, this was really good or easier or more beneficial? We extracted more benefit than we thought we'd get in this area.
Well, again, it's really early to tell, but I think what's been great for me to see is just the really deep conversations about the priorities and how all of our product engineering features that we're prioritizing are specifically helping our company's objectives. And to be able to do that kind of in one point in time and share both, Tempo's goals and then why we're prioritizing different things over others to help support our customers, I think that's been incredibly valuable. The other thing that I think is really helpful of this is just the collaboration. So bringing people together from all the different functions to talk about what's most important, to talk about, hey, how can we help this team over here that has too much work, and how can we either deprioritize work or can we shift some work to another team? Just all that collaboration that happens in this short period of time, I think is one of the most valuable pieces, elements of the outcomes. As Brandon said, now we'll get into execution. So of course that is where it really matters. But these conversations and support that's been shown from our executives to the teams, I think has been really valuable.
What I've kind of observed that guys, and I've worked for software companies and with software companies for a while now. I liked your emoji there for a second, Bonnie. But yeah, I've worked with and for software companies for a while now, and the challenge can be that they don't implement their own solution, or the solution gets sold, the solution, the platform gets sold, but it's hard to track like the empathy with the customer. And one thing that I feel like I'm seeing is you guys just jumped in and you were the customer, like, and how valuable that will be for you. I feel like it can only make you guys better. You've developed your own way of working. How much of this is going to be translatable into, additional value, whether it's like making your tool set better for your customers or understanding the processes they're going through, or maybe even how to advise them from your experiences. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think nobody wants to get on a public forum and admit that their tools aren't the best tools out there, but we definitely, through this process, saw some areas that were rougher than others, and it is a really interesting way to seed your backlog. We like to get as much access to actual customers as often as we can, but it's not always practical. And when you can turn yourself into the customer in a real way, not in a superficial way, then it's a real interesting way to think about how your backlog works. When I was an engineer, I'd sit in my ivory tower and I'd type code and I'd make things that I thought worked perfectly. And I never got more value than sitting with a customer struggling with the software that I had written, and just the mouse movements, the way that they looked at the screen that I thought made perfect sense. There was nothing more valuable than that. And we're able to do that at scale now with our own employees. So it's kind of great.
Absolutely.
You,
I just
Robin?
wanted to say also, just in my experience, It's some of the tooling in our products that we've overlaid into our process has been incredibly helpful. And so I hope to be able to share more details on that, because I think it would be really helpful for other companies to see how you can have better visibility in a really easy to customize manner. So it's been really useful for us, just even though we're using it, because of the tempo on tempo, but also just it helps us do our jobs better every day.
Yep. Go ahead, Bonnie.
I just thought I'd mention we have a couple questions from our participants.
Cool.
One was maybe directed to Brandon. I would love to hear more about the PI planning document framework. You want to describe the preppy planning a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, that was my group at the offsite. So I was very proud of that section. But like Bonnie mentioned, our hypothesis or our going in assumption was, if you've got garbage coming into the system, you're going to have garbage coming out of the system. So we wanted to pay attention to the prioritization process. And we really wanted to get transparency all the way up to the executive level as early as possible. So really, most or a lot of what we did was set milestones along the preppy cycle. And our preppy cycle corresponds with our execution cycle, but it's for the upcoming PI, the upcoming planning increment. So we're already starting on the next PI's preppy cycle right now, and we will have what we call candidate plans that are available at different times. And we also started to acknowledge the I think it's space terminology or whatever. I think they changed it recently, but when I was a kid watching launches, it's always T-10, T-9, et cetera. We've adopted that nomenclature in a week format. So we've got 12-week execution cycles. So at T-10, we've got a set of milestones that we need to hit with our upcoming plan. It starts to get really real at T-6. So midway through the planning increment, we have an actual candidate plan that we can look at, we can feel, and we can start to prioritize against one another. At T-3, we actually formally present that plan, that refined plan to the executive team. And at T-1, we're interacting with teams all along, but the team will actually get a preview of what that plan is going to look like 1 week prior to PI planning. In its like almost official form at that point. And it doesn't become official, obviously, until after the PI planning takes place. But we've got that constant like funneling and refinement that goes on throughout the planning increment that really, I think, sets expectations of timing of when people will get to see things, when it's appropriate to start asking questions about it, because sometimes a question at 11 weeks left in the planning increment isn't all that valuable. Like, oh, how could you possibly prioritize that over my thing that I absolutely need prioritized? Maybe a little valuable, but we've got an awful lot of refinement and different things to think about. A lot of time's going to pass until we actually get this into the actual planning increment. So, yeah, happy to share more if folks are interested.
I just wanted to add a couple more things. So some of the important things that have come out of our first preppy planning was how important it is to have the various functions like technology, of course, and engineering, but also making sure that design is very focused along those same boundaries of the milestones. So we've got product engineering and design, really working well together. And then the other element of that is when Brandon was talking about sharing it out, it's a very important process for the rest of the organization to have the priorities socialized so that we're making sure that we are prioritizing the right things for the teams to work on. And so having those milestones with enough time to get the feedback so that then we refine the candidates in time is an important part of that process too.
Awesome. And then there was another question from Morali here. Brandon, it looked like you wanted to answer that one.
Yeah, let me take a swing, and hopefully Bonnie can jump in as a more of a Jira expert. Yeah, we've sort of glossed over it. There's a very important aspect of this entire project was consolidating what I'd like to call technical debt But we had just an enormous amount of Jira, Confluence systems, not to mention other things. Duplicate Google Workspace systems, duplicate Microsoft 365 systems. IT happens to be in my group, so it's near and dear to my heart trying to wrangle all of these different systems. So we've been taking it in sort of a two-phase approach, at least since we've engaged with Valiantis, and they taught us a better way to do it. So prior to engaging with Valiantis, with Bonnie, and with Sarah, who's helping us out with our Jira migration strategy, we were just kind of like ready, fire, aim with our migration. And we're just like, oh, well, you've got Jira, we've got Jira. Why don't you just throw your project over here and we'll call it good. And that was fine. It just basically took all of the garbage that was in one system and it combined it with the garbage that was in another system. And then we had like, a larger set of interesting configurations to deal with. When the folks at Valiantis came on board, we discussed really at a deep level, like the benefits of cleaning up in place and before moving versus just moving and cleaning up collectively. We sort of ended up in the middle, and maybe Bonnie, you can kind of explain exactly what our strategy was. It meandered over time, but what we tried to take into account was we first wanted to take care of our collaboration needs. So first and foremost, we want to make sure that people can be operating in the same system with each other, so it's easy to reference things. It's easy to find what other folks are doing, even if it's chaos. At least you're in the same system. You don't have to hunt and peck around to different systems throughout the organization. And then as a corollary, once we had that in place, we'll eventually be able to recoup those costs and shut that system down entirely. But I don't know, Bonnie, if you want to add anything among the other stuff that you're doing for us.
Well, you described it well. One of the challenges, though, that I experience working with Tempo as my client, compared to working with another company that isn't an Atlassian partner and an Atlassian expert, is that you know just enough to be dangerous, because you have so many people that understand the Jira system so well. They went forward with doing migrations, even though migrations aren't something that you would typically be charged with doing in your regular day-to-day business. Whereas Valiantis, we do migrations all the time. So we've learned all the ins and outs and all the gotchas and all the things that have to happen to do the cleanup work. And so there is a lot of cleanup work that still has to be happen. So, but it's always hard to prioritize cleanup work. So I always try to focus on, let's establish what is our architecture, what is our baseline future state. Let's get everybody operating there, because it'll be a lot easier to clean up the mess. Because then nobody's using it, we can just delete. But yeah, there's a lot of cleanup that's still on the radar and still to be worked, and I'm looking forward to us working through that.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention, just since this is about governance, essentially at Tempo, we looked at governance in two different manners. We looked at process governance, which we started with Tempo Wow, and we basically have to start a baseline. So we don't have anything to govern until we have an understanding of how is it that we should operate. And after we have started to establish the process governance is then when Bonnie helped us stand up our Atlassian suite Jira governance. And we did a similar method of appointing or recruiting people to be a part of our Jira governance group, and we've renamed it to be our Jira Harmony Council. And we only, I think, started this in June, so it's pretty early on. But we have people representing engineering and operations primarily, because we're and product. And then as we expand our focus, we will have additional people from our organization as part of the members. But essentially, our initial steps are just focused on what is our baseline of how we want our Jira architecture to be designed, what are the workflows, what are the primary issue types, et cetera, and making decisions around that. And then once we have that established, it'll be easier to actually have governance. So I just wanted to share that, because governance should really support how your company works. And that's what our mission is with our Jira Harmony Council.
Let the culture drive the process, let the process drive the tools, not the other way around. Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, and
Yep.
so the governance board, the Jira Harmony Council, has focused on the product engineering architecture, but the intent is to extend that to really support the business teams, the marketing, finance, all of the different organization, so that Jira Harmony Council, I love that name, will be
I do too.
represented across all of that.
Yeah. Well, governance gets a bad rap because just the name, and you guys took, so I don't know if that was another Brandon or if somebody else went in with some branding there.
No,
Wow. Because that's good. I like that a lot.
He's rubbing off
Yeah.
on people.
Yeah, that's
No,
right.
we have,
Yeah.
yeah, well, I'm actually of that the governance kind of term, I think, can have that negative just connotation.
Right.
And we really wanted to have a collaborative approach, and it is governance, and yet again, our purpose is to enhance the way our teams work. And so we wanted to have a collaborative approach. Our teams there are approvers, but we ask everybody on the team to vote. And so we have a collaborative group of people running that as well.
Well, that is awesome. I know we just have a couple minutes here. I just want to be respectful of everybody's time who's joining the webinar. So I'll just ask for any last thoughts and then I'll just do a quick wrap up.
I have one quick question. Which is it? Eating your own dog food or drinking your own champagne?
Yeah, I've coined a new phrase, dog fooding your own champagne. I'm hoping it's going to catch on.
I,
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that's a good last thought. I just wanted to share, and I don't have a funny outro. I just wanted to share sincerely, thank you. It's been an honor to do this project with you guys. It's been an honor to co-present on a webinar publicly with you guys. And when I started off with, we want to provide value at every interaction, Bonnie stated we want to make every interaction remarkable. We hope that for everybody tuning in, whether it's live or you're watching this in a recorded manner, we hope that that's true. I feel like there's been a ton of value that you guys shared. You didn't have to do it, but it really, I think it's a free gift out there to the world. So I hope a lot of people tune in and find this valuable. Thank you so much.